I need someone who challenges me, not someone who agrees with everything, my girlfriend said while defending the coworker she swore was just a friend. I walked away calmly. Months later, she realized the man she chose had been telling everyone a different story. I need someone who challenges me, not someone who agrees with everything. She said it the way people say things they've been rehearsing, clean, confident, and aimed directly at the center of your chest. I didn't respond right away. I just looked at her, and I remember thinking, that didn't come from her. Not the phrasing, not the timing, not the way she held my gaze like she was waiting for me to argue. At the time, I thought she was questioning our relationship. Months later, she'd discover someone else had been shaping that conversation all along. If you enjoy real stories like this, subscribe, because what happened next changed everything for me. I was 34 when everything I thought I understood about loyalty got quietly dismantled. Paige and I had been together for almost 3 years. We met through mutual friends at a rooftop gathering in Midtown, the kind of evening that feels engineered for something to happen. She was sharp, funny, and had this particular way of listening that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. I fell into it completely. We moved in together after 18 months, shared a 2-bedroom in Park Slope, split the bills without resentment, built routines that actually worked. I was a senior operations consultant for a mid-sized logistics firm. She was in marketing at a tech company in Soho. Different industries, similar ambitions, enough overlap to make the conversations interesting. For a long time, that was enough. Then Tanner started appearing in the stories. It didn't register at first. Not really. Every workplace has that one person who becomes a recurring character in the stories your partner brings home. A coworker who says the funny things, notices the absurd things, makes the long days easier. Tanner was apparently that person for Paige. Tanner said something hilarious in the meeting today. Tanner pushed back on the whole campaign strategy, and honestly, he wasn't wrong. Tanner brought coffee for the whole floor again. He's ridiculous, but you kind of love him for it. I smiled at the right moments. I asked reasonable follow-up questions. I did what supportive partners do. I didn't assign weight to any of it. That was probably my first mistake, not in the jealousy sense, but in the paying attention sense. Because looking back, the pattern was already forming. And patterns, once established, don't need your permission to continue. The first thing I actually noticed, the first thing that created a small, quiet friction, was about 3 months before everything ended. We were out to dinner. Nothing special. A Thai place we liked in Carroll Gardens. Paige was telling me about a disagreement she'd had with her department head, Brandon, about a campaign rollout timeline. And Tanner backed me up in the room, she said. He was the only one who actually said something. That was good of him, I said. It wasn't just good. It took courage. Most people just sit there. I remember pausing before I responded. You've talked about him a lot lately. She looked up from her plate. Not defensively. More like she was measuring the observation. He's become a close work friend, she said. Is that an issue? I didn't say it was. You implied it. I hadn't actually. But I recognized the shape of that move. Turning an observation into an accusation, so the person who noticed something becomes the one who has to defend themselves. I let it go. I shouldn't have. My best friend Logan noticed it before I said anything. We were playing basketball on a Sunday morning in Prospect Park, one of those standing plans we'd kept for the better part of 6 years. He was a project manager at a construction firm, practical in the way that people who manage actual physical things tend to be. He didn't theorize. He observed. You seem like you're carrying something, he said between plays. Paige is going through a thing at work. I'm just absorbing some of it. What kind of thing? A coworker. She's leaning on him a lot. Talks about him constantly. Logan caught the ball and held it for a second. How does she talk about him? Admiringly. But not in the way that should concern me. More in the way that I'm apparently not doing enough of something. Does she say that? Not directly. But you know how you can feel a comparison being made without the other person actually making it. He nodded slowly. Yeah, I know that feeling. We kept playing. But the conversation stayed with me longer than the game. Things shifted in February. Paige's company hosted a quarterly offsite, one of those structured team retreats at a venue upstate that's supposed to increase cohesion, but mostly just removes people from their desks and puts them in a room with catered food and a whiteboard. She came home Sunday evening lighter than she'd been in weeks. That itself wasn't suspicious. People decompress on retreats. They get space from routine. It makes sense that someone might come back refreshed. But she mentioned Tanner 11 times in the 2 hours after she walked through the door. I counted. Not obsessively. I wasn't sitting there with a notepad. I counted the way you count when you realize, midway through something, that you've already been counting unconsciously. 11 times. Unprompted. In 2 hours. Tanner organized this whole activity where Tanner was saying in the session that Tanner had this idea for how we could restructure the. I sat on the couch and listened with the same face I always used, the one that said I'm here, keep going, and I felt something start to quietly rearrange itself inside me. Not rage. Not jealousy exactly. Clarity. I want to be careful here, because it's easy in retrospect to make myself look like I knew everything. I didn't. I didn't know what Tanner was actually doing. I didn't know that the version of me he was describing to Paige bore almost no resemblance to the person I actually was. I didn't know that every story she repeated to me had already been filtered through his framing, shaped by his commentary, colored by his editorial choices. I just knew something was wrong, and I kept talking myself out of naming it, because the alternative, bringing it up and being dismissed, felt worse than tolerating the uncertainty. That's the trap, I think. The manipulation doesn't have to be sophisticated to work. It just has to make the person who notices it feel like they're the unreasonable one for noticing. My business associate Drew was the one who gave me the first outside data point. Drew ran a small digital consulting firm and had a client who worked at Paige's company, not on her team, but in the same building, same floor culture, enough proximity to know the general social atmosphere. We were having lunch to talk about a contract referral when Drew mentioned it casually, the way people mention things they think you probably already know. By the way, he said, cutting into his sandwich, I heard from Marcus, at Paige's company, that there's some guy over there who's apparently got a reputation for getting close to people's partners. Not like, confirmed anything, just a reputation. One of those guys who collects lies. I put my fork down. What's his name? Drew looked at me. I think it might be the same guy you've mentioned, he said carefully. I didn't say anything for a moment. Has anything happened? Drew asked. Nothing I can point to. But something. Yeah, I said. Something. The next few weeks were a study in watching a person change while trying to convince yourself they aren't. Paige started coming home later. Not significantly, 30, 40 minutes. But consistently. And she'd started her phone face down, which she'd never done before. I want to be honest. I don't know if anything physical happened. I genuinely don't. That was never the full point for me. The point was that she'd started living in a version of our relationship that Tanner had helped construct. She was comparing me to a description of myself that wasn't accurate. She was finding me lacking against a standard he'd quietly installed. That was the real infidelity, if you want to call it something. She was letting someone else narrate her life. Qley, a longtime friend who worked in financial services and had known Paige longer than I had, called me one evening in late February. I had drinks with Paige last week, he said. With Haley too. Haley was Paige's sister. Someone I'd always gotten along with well. How was it? Fine. But Qley paused. She mentioned someone. A co-worker. Tanner. She mentioned him a lot. I know. Did you know she's been telling people you're emotionally unavailable? I sat down. What? Not in those words exactly. But something like that. That you don't challenge her. That the relationship has become comfortable in a way that feels like stagnation. I was quiet for a long moment. That's not a conversation she's had with me. I know, Qley said. That's why I'm having it with you. I didn't go home and confront her that night. I went home and made dinner. We watched something on television. We talked about her week and my week and whether we wanted to go upstate in the spring. And I sat with what Qley had told me, turning it over quietly, trying to understand what it meant. She'd been describing our relationship to other people using language that hadn't come from her own experience. She'd never told me she felt stagnant. She'd never said she needed more challenge. Those weren't her observations. They were Tanner's observations, filtered through enough time that she'd started believing they were her own. That's a particular kind of damage. The kind that's hard to explain because there's no single moment you can point to. Jocelyn, a mutual friend who knew both of us from our early days in the city, texted me on a Tuesday. Hey, I think you should know that Paige told me some things that surprised me. Can we talk? I called her on my lunch break. She said she doesn't feel like herself anymore in your relationship, Jocelyn said. And she says Tanner is the only person at work who actually sees her potential. Did she say anything else about him? Jocelyn hesitated. She said he challenges her, that he asks hard questions, that he makes her think. I looked out the window of the office building across the street. And what did you say? I said it sounded like she was confusing attention with insight. I almost laughed. Did she hear that? No, Jocelyn said. I don't think she did. The breaking point came on a Thursday in March. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't start with a fight. It started the way most real endings do, quietly, in the kitchen, over something small. She'd been on her phone since she got home. I asked if she wanted to talk about what was on her mind, because I could tell something was. She put the phone down. "I've been thinking," she said. "Okay. About us. About where we are." I waited. "I feel like we've stopped growing," she said. "Like we're just maintaining. And I don't think I want to maintain anymore. I want to evolve." "What would evolving look like?" I asked. She paused. Like the question had surprised her. Like she hadn't expected me to engage with it. She'd expected me to push back. "I want someone who challenges me," she said. "Not someone who agrees with everything." I also started working with Wesley, a financial advisor my colleague Carter had referred me to. Carter ran a technology firm and had a solid instinct for people worth trusting, so when he vouched for someone, I took it seriously. Wesley helped me reconfigure some things I'd been putting off, restructure a few accounts, build a clearer long-term picture. It wasn't glamorous. It was just responsible. But there's something grounding about getting your financial life in order after emotional chaos. It feels like reclaiming something concrete. Sawyer, an investor I'd met through a conference the previous year, hosted by someone named Harper, reached out in May about a consulting project. His firm was looking for operational guidance on a logistics expansion, and my name had come up. I said yes. And that yes led to another yes, which led to a project with a nonprofit director named Qley, which led to a speaking invitation from a conference organizer named Olivia. I'm not telling you this to catalog my accomplishments. I'm telling you because the growth was quiet. There was no announcement, no performance, no audience. I was just doing the work. And the work was doing something back. I heard about Paige secondhand, the way you hear about most things in a city where social circles eventually overlap. Sydney, Paige's best friend, someone I genuinely liked during the relationship, ran into Logan in June. They talked for a few minutes. Logan called me later that evening. "Sydney said Paige is having a hard time," he said. "I'm sorry to hear that." She didn't elaborate. But she also said, and she asked me to pass this along, that things with Tanner weren't what Paige expected. I didn't respond right away. What does that mean? I don't know exactly. Sydney seemed like she didn't want to say too much. But she said Paige had heard some things that were confusing her. The fuller picture came together in pieces over the summer. Not from Paige. From the periphery, the kind of information that travels through social networks when the center of a story starts to crack. A former co-worker of mine, named Claire, happened to know someone at Paige's company. She mentioned, at a small dinner I attended in July, that there had been some internal friction in Paige's department. "There's a guy over there," Claire said, "who has a bit of a reputation for getting too involved in people's personal dynamics. Apparently, he told different things to different people, and eventually those people started comparing notes." She wasn't talking about Tanner by name in that moment, but she was describing him exactly. I asked what kind of different things. Apparently, he told some people he was helping a friend through a difficult relationship, and told other people that the relationship had already fallen apart because of something the partner had done, and told a third group that he'd never been involved at all. I sat with that for a moment. 3 different stories. At minimum, Claire said. The thing is, it worked for a while because none of those groups talked to each other. When they finally did, she trailed off. The math didn't add up. Not even close. This is the part one want to describe carefully because I don't want to get it wrong. What Tanner had been doing, or what it appeared he'd been doing, wasn't dramatic in a movie villain sort of way. There was no grand scheme. There was no single devastating lie. It was smaller than that. And in some ways, smaller things are harder to defend against. He would tell Paige that I seemed checked out, that she'd mentioned things that made him worry about her. And then he'd go back to his friends and mention, casually, that he was helping a colleague navigate a difficult home situation. He would emphasize Paige's strengths to her face and then describe her as emotionally fragile to people who didn't know her, which positioned him as a protector and built his social credibility simultaneously. He would introduce small frictions, suggest interpretations of neutral things I'd supposedly done or said that made them sound pointed, and then be present and sympathetic when those interpretations caused Paige distress. He wasn't malicious in a theatrical sense. He was strategic in a quiet one, and the strategy served him. Every time Paige was upset with me, she turned to him. Every time she questioned the relationship, he got to play the person who understood. The conflict between us was the currency that funded his role in her life. Haley, Paige's sister, was the one who eventually told me what happened inside their friendship group. She reached out directly, which surprised me. We'd always gotten along, but I hadn't expected her to reach across that divide. "I wanted to tell you myself," she said on the phone, "because I think you deserve to know." Okay. Paige found out that Tanner had been telling people things that weren't true. About her, about you, about the situation. One of her co-workers, I think her name is Evelyn, compared notes with another colleague, and some of the stories Tanner had told them contradicted each other directly. What did Paige say when she found out? Haley was quiet for a moment. She was devastated, she said finally. Not just because of what he did, but because she started going back through everything and realizing how much of what she believed about your relationship had come from him. I stood very still. Did she? She doesn't expect anything, Haley said quickly. She's not asking for a conversation or a chance to explain. She told me she just needed me to know, and she thought you deserved to know, and she was too ashamed to call you herself. I thought about what to say. I appreciate you telling me. I'm sorry it took this long for it to come out. These things always take the time they need. I thought about Paige a lot in the weeks after that call. Not with anger, not with satisfaction, or vindication, or any of the emotions I might have expected. I thought about her with something closer to sadness. Because she'd been manipulated too. That's the thing people sometimes miss when a story like this gets simplified. Tanner hadn't targeted me. He'd used Paige. Her trust, her openness, her genuine desire to grow. He'd taken those things, real, good things about her, and pointed them in a direction that served him. She believed she was choosing challenge. She'd been choosing chaos. And the cruelest part is that those two things can feel identical when you're inside them. My senior director position was confirmed in August. Brandon sent the official communication on a Wednesday afternoon. Mason, the executive director, followed up with a call to walk me through what the expanded role would look like. There was a press release, a note in an industry newsletter that a journalist named Sophia had been putting together on operational leadership transitions at mid-market firms. My name appeared in it briefly, accurately, without fanfare. Tyler, the senior recruiter who'd helped the firm manage the position search, told me afterward that the board had specifically noted my stability under pressure as a deciding factor. Stability under pressure. I thought about that phrase. I thought about what the past 8 months had looked like from the outside. The quiet exit from a relationship, the refusal to perform distress, the focus on work, the absence of drama. I wondered if any of them knew what that stability had actually cost. In September, I was invited to speak at a leadership conference organized by Olivia. The topic was operational resilience, how organizations maintain function under systemic pressure. I didn't plan to make it personal, but there was a moment near the end of my talk where I said something I hadn't prepared that came out of something I'd been turning over for months. The challenge of real growth, I said, is that it's invisible to the people looking for performance. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't create drama. It just accumulates in decisions that don't make the news, in restraint that nobody applauds, in work that gets done because it needs to be done, not because someone's watching. Conference host Harper asked me afterward what had prompted that particular line. Something I learned the hard way, I said. She nodded like she understood. Maybe she did. Jocelyn texted me in October. I heard everything that came out about Tanner. I want you to know I never thought you were what she said. I should have said that more clearly back then. I wrote back, you did what you could. Nobody had the full picture. She misses you, Jocelyn wrote. I don't think she'd want me to tell you that. But I think you deserve to know. I held my phone for a moment. Then I put it face up on the table, because that's a habit I'd relearned, and didn't respond to that part. There wasn't a response that was fair to either of us. I want to be honest about where things actually stand. Paige and I have not spoken. That's not cruelty, and it's not a wound either. It's just the shape of what's left after a thing like this. Some relationships don't survive their third chapter. That doesn't mean they didn't matter. It means they completed what they were. I don't have anger toward her. I have something more complicated, which is understanding without proximity. I understand what happened to her. I understand that the person who confused her was skilled at confusion. I understand that the qualities she dismissed in me, the calm, the consistency, the lack of theatrics, were easy to frame as weaknesses by someone who needed conflict to stay relevant. I understand all of that. But understanding something doesn't mean you return to it. Tanner left the company in September. I heard about it from Drew, who heard it from his contact. No details beyond that, resigned or was pushed out. Nobody was saying clearly. His social media had gone quiet. The confident, frequently posting version of him that had apparently flooded Paige's feeds had simply stopped. Curtains down. Show over. The community he'd built around his carefully managed image started asking questions when the image stopped being managed. That's what happens when someone's entire presence depends on constant narrative maintenance. The moment they stop feeding it, people realized they were watching performance, not a person. I didn't feel triumphant when I heard. I felt tired, the way you feel when something that cost a lot of energy finally stops mattering. By the end of the year, my life looked different in ways I hadn't planned for, but don't regret. New role. New apartment. A one-bedroom in a quieter neighborhood in Brooklyn that I chose for myself, furnished slowly and deliberately. New professional relationships with people like Hudson, a business consultant I'd met through the conference circuit, and Abigail, a marketing director whose firm had overlapped with one of my projects. New habits. Longer runs in the mornings. Books I'd been meaning to read for years. Less time on my phone. More time at actual tables with actual people. Logan and I kept our Sunday basketball games. Qley came through town in November, and we had dinner. Just us, a good restaurant. No agenda. You seem different, he said. Different how? Settled. But not in a resigned way. More like you know where you are. I thought about that. I think I do, I said. Here is what I actually believe, having had the months to think about it. The thing Paige wanted, challenge, was real. It's a real thing to want. To be pushed, to have your assumptions questioned, to feel like the person across from you sees you clearly enough to ask the hard thing. That's not an unreasonable desire. The mistake was letting someone else define what that looked like. Because Tanner's version of challenge was not about her growth. It was about his position. Every uncomfortable moment he created between us gave him access. Every doubt he planted made her more reliant on his validation. Every conflict that sent her toward him was a conflict that served him. Challenge, real challenge, asks something of you. It doesn't just make you feel like someone sees you. It asks you to be more than you are. What she'd chosen wasn't challenge. It was a mirror held by someone who controlled the angle. I don't know if Paige ever fully understood what happened. I hope she does, not for my sake, but for hers. Because people who've been manipulated through their own good instincts, their curiosity, their ambition, their desire to grow, deserve to understand what was done to them. Deserve to not mistake it for a flaw in themselves. She wasn't wrong to want more. She was just wrong about the source. Haley texted me in December. A brief message, clearly sent with care. I hope the end of your year is good. You deserved better than what happened. I hope you know that. I wrote back simply, thank you. Take care of her. She sent a single thumbs up. That was the last communication. I walked home from a dinner in late December, a client event that Evelyn had organized, warm room, good conversation, the kind of evening that reminds you what life actually feels like when it's not under pressure. And I stopped for a moment on the bridge. City lights on the water. That particular winter air that's cold enough to clarify things. I thought about the kitchen conversation in March. Her saying I didn't challenge her. My quiet response. The decision to leave without a speech. I thought about what it had cost. And I thought about what it had returned. Not in a ledger sense. Not as a transaction where suffering leads to reward. More in the sense that clarity, once found, is a kind of wealth that no one can take from you. I walked the rest of the way home. Made tea. Read for an hour. Slept without difficulty. She thought she was choosing someone who challenged her. She never realized she was choosing someone who needed conflict to exist. And I never stopped being the thing she couldn't see. The person who holds steady, not because he has nothing to say, but because he knows the difference between a conversation worth having and a performance not worth joining. That's not accommodation. That's judgment. And it took losing someone for me to understand that I never needed to defend it.